Welcome back, I'm Bill. I've got an interesting lantern here today. This is an American gas machine company, model 3927. I believe it's a World War II era military lantern. It doesn't necessarily mean that this was used or owned by the military. AGM made the same lanterns for essential civilian production. So, someone like a farmer could get access to a lantern if he needed one. And this could very well be that sort of thing. In fact, I know AGM was cited and fined a couple of times during the war for overproducing. So we know they made more than what their government quota was when it came to military lanterns. It's marked in ways that are similar to this Coleman 220BX, and this was designed for military use. Again, they made them for civilian production as well. But the 220BX was a military lantern before the mil specs were a thing. And I believe this is the AGM equivalent of a 220BX. It's clearly wartime as opposed to brass. The fount is steel. There's a lot on here that you would normally expect to be brass, and it's steel. The burner tubes, interestingly enough, one burner tube is steel, the other is brass, so this was probably replaced at some point. The air tube is steel, the manifold is steel. Generators clearly, actually, the generator's brass. The nut down here is steel. So it looks very much like the Coleman 220BX. Unlike my 220BX, where nothing moved, at least this things are moving somewhat sluggishly, and the cleaning lever doesn't quite go all the way. But I'm going to tear this down. We're going to clean it up. I'm going to strip the fount and repaint it and get this thing hopefully looking like new and running like new as well. So let me reposition the camera so you can see better as I disassemble this, and we'll tear into it. So far, just looking at this, it looks like a standard AGM everything, more or less. So I'm going to start out with the generator, and we'll take that off. Oops. That was already loose, so I suspect someone's been into this. And the tip cleaner, well, at least it's in there. It's pushed up kind of high. Hopefully it looks like somebody's modified a 220 to work on here, but at least it's intact. Does it say Coleman on it? I don't see any markings anywhere. But I suspect this is actually a 220 generator, but we can make that work. That would be why the tip cleaner lever wasn't going up and down, because it was hitting, the generator wasn't actually hooked in here. You can see Coleman tip cleaners have a hook at the bottom, and this goes through an eye on the top of its eccentric block. AGM, the rod is straight, and it's got a little notch in the bottom, or a groove, and this claw grabs onto it. Okay, that's the generator. Now let's get this guy off. What size is that? Looks like it's a 9/16. That nut off, we can lift the burner assembly and get to this screw. Yep, that's loose. Someone's definitely been into this lantern. And now we should be able to make sure there's nothing else that's stuck on. But, should be able to just unscrew it. And there. So let's see if we can turn it on its side. There we go. So far, apart from materials differences, this doesn't really seem any different than, say, an AGM 2572. Someone's sort of smashed that up in order to get to that screw. Go ahead and bend these tabs up so we can take this badge off. And I'm going to hold this up to the camera so I have a record of how this went on. I'm going to have to undo all 4 of the tabs. Usually you can get away with undoing 2 of them, but because of the horizontal alignment of these. So hopefully we can polish this up and get that lettering to show a little bit better. The model number part is almost completely burned off on the top, but let's see what we can do with that. All right, now the valve. And again, it looks like a typical AGM valve. I'm looking, there's no hex on here, which means we should be able to just turn this valve out. If there's a hex on the top on an AGM, you want to make sure you grab that before putting any pressure on the valve, because you'll probably end up spinning the bung out. Tight. So I'm guessing someone had been in as far as the valve, but I don't think they've been in this far. All right. And with AGMs, in order to keep the pickup orifice clean, they've got a little brass screen that's crimped around the bottom here. So we want to get that off so that we can clean it. And sometimes they don't go back on, but it's not as big a deal with modern gasoline. These were made back in the day when people were siphoning gas out of their car engines or out of their car gas tanks to fill their stoves and lanterns. So just need to work this clip open. Take that off, it's just a little wire. And just gently work this around. There we go. And that's a brass mesh. And the tip. In many ways, these are like an old Coleman L220 or 228 slant with the little tiny pickup orifice on there. Do the valve stem. And take the knob off. Look at the valve stem, so I'll unscrew that. Packing looks good. All right, so yeah, all I need to do, I want to get this off so I can clean the valve inside thoroughly. So we'll come back to that in a minute. The tip cleaner, it's like a Coleman. This, you can't really remove that either. So we're just going to leave this all as one piece since it's working properly. That burner tube was only finger tight. And so was this, and I can tell there's some wrench marks on the steel here, so someone's had this apart before. And my guess would be this set screw is probably completely rusted up, and no matter what I do, if I try to get that out, it's just going to shear off. So since I can get to everything here, I'm just going to leave this the way it is. The fuel cap, make sure it's tight, and then we can unscrew the center screw. And this looks like somebody squished an O-ring in there as opposed to an actual cap gasket. We can fix that. And finally, the pump. There's our pump assembly. AGMs are different than Coleman's. There's no air stem in there, and this slotted bit, so that the pump just goes up and down, and then this slotted bit fits into the check valve, and the check valve actually turns and opens and closes. But I do want to take this apart. I want to soak the We'd like to soak the pump leather. Pop this insert out. And I'm going to plop this down into some leather conditioner, and then we'll let that sit while we work on this. Now this that's interesting. We've got an extra. Yeah, I've never seen that before. It's a little circle of leather. It almost looks like someone trimmed an old pump cup before putting a new one in. But I suspect that's being used as a spacer on here. All right, so that's everything except this. I'm going to leave the check valve alone because it seems to be working already. So I'm going to just heat this with my propane torch, and that should loosen it up, and I can unscrew that. And we will take all of these pieces and put them in citric acid to de-rust them, to clean them up, and we will get to work on stripping the fount. So, and then we'll clean it out because there's stuff in there. So I'll see you back in a bit. Since getting decent paint stripper that actually works has become next to impossible these days, and when you do find it, because it hasn't been banned in Canada, but because it has been in the US, it's cut the market. So when you do find it here, it's exorbitantly expensive, like $80 for a liter. And the non-volatile stuff doesn't really seem to work. I've been using this metal brush. It's not too aggressive. It's actually fairly soft and it's starting to wear out, but I've been having good success with this on steel founts. I wouldn't use this on brass, I don't think, but on steel founts it works pretty well. So I'll get this started. I'm not going to film the whole thing, but I'll show you how it goes. So got a face mask, and here we go. So you see how that works and how easily it comes off. This is why I want to repaint this. You look at this wrong and the stuff flakes off. It's been making a mess everywhere. And since it's steel, it hasn't rusted so far, but I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to carry on, and when I'm done, I'll be back. All right, there we go. Paint stripped off. Actually, it came off quite easily. Don't know what the deal is with this, but it seems to be factory, whatever it is. I don't see, when I look down through the hole, there doesn't seem to be anything corresponding to that on the inside of the fount on the bottom, but there is plenty of debris in there. So I'm gonna put this in citric acid along with the other parts and make sure the inside is de-rusted and clean. And we'll go from there. Then we'll repaint this. All right, here we are for the citric acid bath. I use about 1 teaspoon of citric acid powder per liter of water. I've got brass in the small pan on the left, and I will have steel on the right. The first thing I'm going to put in here is the fount, and it's interesting. It's got this blob on the bottom, which looks like a repair, but it appears to be factory, because even though a lot of the paint was missing from the bottom, there was paint on that blob. And it's clear that this fount has never been repainted. I'm going to put it in the citric acid just to de-rust the inside. There was some debris in it, but it wasn't metallic debris. I filled it with BBs and shook it. I didn't inflict that on you on camera, but then shook it out, and there were no chunks or bits of metal or anything that came out, just rust dust. And looking inside, most of it's clean. There are a few spots with surface rust, but nothing that's flaking off or nothing that would indicate, someone was trying to fix the bottom, like there was a hole or a pinhole or something like that. So I'm going to put this in the citric acid just to get rid of any rust residue that's inside there, and then I will move on to the other metal or the other steel parts in this larger pot. So we'll just drop this guy in, and away it goes. And I'll let that sit for a good hour or so. Let's start working on these parts as they come out of the citric acid. I've got the fount here, and I've got all of our brass over here. Just going to rub everything down with 4/0 steel wool. I think this has a good surface for painting on it. It surprisingly doesn't have any pitting. I kind of suspect this is some kind of an alloy and not just straight steel. Make sure everything gets flushed with water. Get rid of the citric acid. You could use some baking soda, just neutralize it, but I'm not sure that that's really necessary. I don't usually take that extra step when I've never had any issues. These round brushes that you can get on Amazon for a few dollars are very handy. I'll put that aside here for now. I'll dry this off. I find to get the water out, I roll up a paper towel, stick it in the fuel bung, and then shake it a few times. And I'll do that a couple times to get as much loose water as I can out. And then once that's done, I will put a few ounces of methyl hydrate, or you could use isopropanol as long as it's high percentage, like 99%. I will put that in here, swish it around, shake it, turn it upside down. The alcohol will absorb any water that's left, and that will dry the fount out. It's interesting that just like the Coleman 220BX, which was a wartime lantern made, I guess, for military contracts or to military spec, just like that, this also has a steel tip cleaner assembly. All right, and now our steel parts. That cleaned up better than I anticipated. Right, and that's all of our brass and steel parts except for the burner frame. It's still in the pot. It has to go in by itself because it's a large piece. So we'll now take these pieces, we'll dry them off, and take them to the polishing wheel. So this is the polishing setup I've got. This is a cotton wheel, and I use this white polishing compound. Maybe about time to replace this wheel, but it still seems to be working. See what this collar does. It cleaned up a lot better than I anticipated. It's been a long time since I had a collar turn out that nicely. I think that's great. It's clean up this valve assembly. I want to be careful of the pickup that we don't brace my hand on that and snap it off or anything. It's pretty good. Take care of this pump handle and pump. These are easier to polish if you can get them off, but not bad. All right. I think that's a significant improvement. Let's paint the fount. It's prepped and ready to go. I've stripped it with the wire brush. It's been through the citric acid. I've given it a final wipe down with methyl hydrate to make sure there are no oils on it. It's nice and smooth. So I'm not going to prime. I've been finding lately the priming often just ends up being more trouble than it's worth. So I'm going to use this Krylon gloss green, hunter green. I found it's a little bit bluer than the Rust-Oleum, and it's a good match for AGM's Hunter Green, or whatever they called it. The other one that works well, the cap may not look like it, but this green gloss trim-clad paint is also a really good match for the AGM green, although this particular one is a little bit bluer than some of the later. So I'm going to use the Krylon. Let me get my dust mask on, or my respirator on. What I'm going to do is hit this with a light coat and then wait a few minutes and then hit it with another light to medium coat, and we'll go from there. It may need more, it may not, but usually no more than 3 coats is necessary.
I'll start with the bottom. Now I'll just hit the top and go around the sides. I think that's good for a first coat.
Come back in a few minutes and we'll see how it looks. All right, let's do the second coat. I got lucky with the paint. I had maybe a quarter of a can there, maybe a third to do the first coat and the second coat. And as you saw, the second coat, as I was finishing up, the paint can went dry, which was completely expected. I had a second can shaken up and ready to go, popped the top off, and nothing. The can's a dud. I think the propellant has leaked out somehow. It's been sitting here for maybe a year and a half. So anyhow, I was lucky in that with the first two coats I got not a perfect, but it's completely covered at least, and I think it's a satisfactory coat of paint. I can still see some of the marks on the metal underneath. A second coat probably would have smoothed those over a little, or third coat rather, probably would have smoothed those over a bit, but it's okay, and so I'll be happy with this. At some point after the paint's cured, ages from now, maybe I'll replace that other can of paint and finish it up, do a third coat. But for now, this will get us through. Let's start putting it back together. So let's do the fuel cap first. It's our insert and cap gasket, and we need our screw. There's our screw. So we'll put the cap gasket on first. Put in there nice and easy. Definitely wartime when even the cap insert is steel. And the pump, I did not remove the check valve, as you noticed probably, so we'll put our pump back together. Got that leather spacer or whatever they were using that as. I'll go ahead and put that back in. And we've got our pump cup. It completely absorbed the Lexol conditioner that I had it in. So put the spacer on first. And our leather, which I will blot. That. This little guy goes in on top of that, and then our nut to secure the whole thing. Oops. These nuts tend to like to go on just one way. There we go. And these like to be good and tight, otherwise you end up with a nut and pump leather falling off in the bottom of the pump tube, and that's just no good. I'm going to oil this with some 3-in-1 oil. You can use pretty much any oil you want as long as it's not a vegetable oil. Neat's Foot oil is what Coleman used. I don't know about other manufacturers, they probably use the same thing. But as long as it's vegetable oil, it's fine. Motor oil, 3-in-1 oil. In fact, in a pinch, if you're camping and you need oil for the pump cup, you could even use oil from the dipstick in your car or your truck, which I actually have done on one occasion. So, line up the holes. And we need a little screw. There we go. Now, we'll put the valve back together and install it. So the first thing we'll do is put the bottom of the pickup back on. That's this little guy, and making sure I can see light through there. It's a hole, it's bigger than the hole in the generator tip, but not much, but you can see light through it. So if you can't see light through it, probably needs to be cleaned. And I've cleaned our brass screen, and we'll put that back on. And these little wires are always fun to put back in place. You want to get it pinched on there, and also in the groove. All right, that's on. Now we need to put the air meter back in. We've got the cap and the spring and the actual meter itself. So this serves the same function as the instant lighting feature and the air wire on a Coleman lantern. Whereas a Coleman, the air, you've got the fuel and air tube, and the air enters the outside, flows down through the outer chamber, and then up through the inner chamber, and at the bottom there's a small little pickup orifice and an air wire or metering rod that runs down in the bottom. When the valve is closed all the way, that air wire pokes out through the hole and closes off, or almost closes off, the fuel supply. So you get mostly air running down, picking up the little bit of leaking fuel and carrying the droplets up to the valve and to the generator, which prevents the generator from flooding when it's cold. AGM came up with a different design, and they used this, I guess probably from the 30s. I don't know if it goes back to the 20s or not, but through the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, because the early 50s AGM lanterns I have are the same way. At some point in the 50s, they switched to a system very, very much like Coleman's. Fuel comes in through here, and then this is an intake for the air at the top of the fount. And what happens, you've got a little spring-loaded plunger here that goes in, and it's tapered. So when the valve stem is screwed in, it goes in, and this little tip here meets up with the tip of this metering rod. And as you screw the valve in, it pushes this back and opens it up. And but it's spring-loaded. The spring sits in the cap, like so, and then this screws into the back. So when the valve is screwed in, it's pushing this metering rod out or to the back, which allows air to flow from the top of the fount through this little hole up into the valve, and that prevents it from flooding when it's cold. Once it's running, then you open the valve all the way, so it backs out this direction. That allows that metering rod to move all the way in, and it shuts off. It basically shuts off against the back side of the valve seat, and it cuts off the airflow. So it's a nifty design. It does the same thing that Coleman's instant lighting circuit does. The one downside is Coleman's instant lighting circuit, because the air from the top of the fount that's used is flowing down through that fuel and air tube and going down below the level of the fuel. Once the pressure is built up properly in the generator and it's vaporizing, it shuts off that airflow. So you can leave the valve partly open instead of fully open, and you won't lose pressure from the top of the fount. On this, if you forget to crank the valve stem all the way out to open it fully, this is still open, and you'll very quickly lose the pressure in the fount. So you have to, once these are running, you have to remember to be sure to open it up all the way. Packing. There we go. See how that feels. Back it off just a little bit. That's not making much of a difference, so go ahead and tighten it. Okay. Now we're ready to screw this into the fount. So I'm going to add just a little bit of Permatex Blue. This will keep it from leaking if it doesn't quite seal all the way. And if I need to clock it properly, and if it's not clocking properly, that will tighten on the threads as well, or dry on the threads and hold it in place. And this is proper. We want the valve stem pointing this way with the pump on the left. And this doesn't take a lot. In fact, if you overdo it, it kind of squishes out and makes a big mess. Get blue goop all over the top. Uh-oh. Well, I guess that means we're not going to bother with the brass screen. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. Modern fuel is clean, so we don't really have to worry about that clogging up. The fount is clean. It's been through a nice citric acid bath and flushed out with methyl hydrate, so I'm not worried about crud in the fount anyways. Okay. And that's how we want it aligned. So we go. Now we need to take the collar, and this was on. Fortunately, this doesn't clean up very well. What they did, I think they had some kind of a like gold coating on the metal maybe, and then they put black paint, I'm guessing silk screened on, and the end result is that if you try to polish it, you just rub off the black paint and you make it less legible. So let's see, we had, it goes over the fuel cap, so it's going to go like that. Look better higher. I think we'll put it right there. So, just fold these tabs back down. This goes, let's see, we want to put this on first, or put it here, and then rotate it on, and that looks correct. I did straighten out this opening a little bit. This is to get a screwdriver in here to get to this screw. On most AGM lanterns with this design, you just have to unscrew the retaining nut for the frame assembly, lift it up and stick a screwdriver under here. This, they actually made a hole, but apparently the hole wasn't big enough for someone's oversized screwdriver. So let's put our knob on. Just realized before we put the burner frame back on, let's take the collar off, and we've got this little set screw here. Go ahead and just get that started. That is accessed through this hole in the collar, the one that someone made a little bit big. Now the burner frame has two holes, one in the center and one off center. The center is for the valve. That on, and then put the retainer nut on, at least loosely. And then we'll put our burner together. Got a brass and a steel. Actually, in this light, they don't look too different. The brass would be a later replacement, since they only made the steel ones during the war. Who knows what happened to it? All right, this threads into that loop in the back of the valve. Should just tighten up in about the right spot. We want to line it up. This center upright makes it easier, and then that set screw makes sure it's tight. But I'm going to leave the set screw for now, because putting the generator on may reveal that we're not quite straight, or not quite square with everything. All right, now for the generator. I noticed on the tip it's got a V. That indicates that it's a Coleman 220 generator, as the guts are certainly newer than anything that would have been made by AGM. So we'll put this all together. Since this is basically functionally the same as a 220, a 220 generator will work just fine. Because the AGM cleaning needle is straight and it's got a groove around it at the bottom, and that groove fits into this claw. So the 220 generator needs to be modified. It doesn't have a groove, but it does have the hook. But the base of this is all a little bit too big. So if you file down the sides, that makes it thin enough. The 220 generator has a bulge on the back. So you want to file that off, and then the hook is too long. So if you put the hook in there and everything else fits, the hook will stick out too far, and when you go to lower it, it'll catch on the top of the valve there. So you also need to file off that hook until it's just long enough to catch in that in that claw. I'm pretty sure this generator nut is later as well. I think the original almost certainly would have been steel. So you see it fits in the claw there. We'll lower it, it clears, perfect. We'll just screw down the nut. And everything is straight and in line, so I can tighten this set screw now. All right, we just have a vent nut left. So let's tie on some mantles. Use these Peerless 2CHGs. These are the equivalent of a Coleman number 21. They should be a bit better in quality than the current Colemans, although I haven't tried these yet. These are the newest Peerless mantles, and I notice people said they don't have the Peerless P logo on the side, and I think they were being made in the Philippines, and these are made in India. So there have been some complaints that these aren't as good as the Philippine-made ones, which I've had no complaints with the ones made in the Philippines. So hopefully these work all right. I'm sure they'll work. They may not be as bright as I would like. I don't think the issue is that they don't work. Mantles are just not the same since everyone quit using thorium. But thorium was an issue for the people who worked in the factories. It's mildly radioactive. It glows really well. But if you work in the factory and you're exposed to it all the time, it can cause a problem. Okay, there we go. This is not the original globe, this is a Coleman globe. There we go. All right, there we are. Through the magic of video editing, I'll be back in a second, and this will be fueled up, and our mantles will be burned in. All right, mantle's ready. It's gassed up. I've pumped in about 25 pumps. So let's first, I'm going to turn the knob a crack and listen to see if we get a sputtering sound. The fuel system is going to be bone dry after having it apart. So it can take a while for the gas to get there sometimes to the generator. So just listen for a sputtering. Oh, and it's sputtering already. So we're ready to go. Blow out any vapor. And I guess it should just take off. Valve all the way to shut off that air supply. Add some pressure back in. And there we go. I think that looks pretty good. I don't know how long it's been since she saw life. She wasn't running when I got her. I should say, safety issues, something like this, especially where there's what looks almost like a patch on the bottom. It's always a good idea to do a pressure test. And if you need to do that quickly, you can make sure you've got a good fuel cap or cap gasket on, pump it up. And if you take all the uppers off, so you just have the valve on there, make sure the valve is closed, pump it up, fill your sink up with water, and put it in the sink and look for bubbles. That'll tell you if your check valve might be leaking. If you're using the actual cap gasket or cap, that may tell you if your gasket's leaking. It may tell you if you've got a valve leak, but what you really are concerned about is any air bubbles coming out of the fount. I didn't do that on this, but when I got it, I pressurized it because I wanted to see if I could get it to run, and the valve was and the generator were gummed up somewhere, so it wouldn't pass anything. But I pumped it up and left it for a good month, and when I forgot about it and when I took the fuel cap off, all the gas blasted out. So I know there aren't any pinholes or anything like that leaking air, but something like this, it's not a bad idea to do a dunk test. That may be a subject for another video. So there we go. American gas machine, military lantern. This was from before the days of the mil-spec, made during World War II. All steel except for the valve and generator fuel pickup components. Thanks for watching. See you next time.